know, some of professional wrestling's all-time greatest mic workers have made their way through World Wrestling Entertainment at one point or another in their illustrious careers, right? Some legendary wrestlers and managers who immediately come to mind: the Nature Boy Ric Flair. He's given the fans timeless interviews and some of the most memorable catchphrases used even during today's pop culture, as seen in hip-hop music videos such as the song Ric Flair by Killer Mike and Ric Flair Drip by Offset. Paul Heyman, whose on-screen persona coupled with his sharp tongue and speaking abilities legitimized the clients he managed, most notably Brock Lesnar. The Rock used to say he was the most electrifying man in sports entertainment and arguably the most charismatic talker in the history of pro wrestling. The list goes on, but what about your unconventional mic workers? Men who portrayed characters who were dark, witty, cunning, and give the gab that would immediately draw you in and have you hanging on to each and every word. They were different. They didn't cut promos considered to be atypical or formulaic, and were very effective in getting their points across. They could teach you a masterclass on how to effectively tell a story and get the audience so invested in what they were conveying that they need not even be the best in-ring workers, for instance. These men were cut from a different cloth, men like Mick Foley. It didn't matter if he was portraying the deranged Mankind character, lurking in the boiler room, or Cactus Jack cutting a promo from an undisclosed location. His I Gave You Cactus Jack and Kane Dewey promos, nothing short of iconic. Raven, he used his charisma, predictability, propaganda to lead several groups of lost souls, miscreants, and misfits such as the Raven's Nest, the Flock, and the Deadpool. Bray Wyatt, he formed the Wyatt family. His charismatic personality, unconventional beliefs, and his ability to articulate his family's narrative sucked the viewer in before he even made his TV debut on the main roster. I believe the inspiration for the character may have been a nod to Waylon Mercy, whose creepy promos made an instant impression in the WWF days of old. Then there's Jake.
Pro Wrestling Illustrated, the world's #1 wrestling magazine, presents Press Conference.
Today on Press Conference, the Snake, Jake Roberts. This is Craig Peters, Associate Editor of Pro Wrestling Illustrated magazine, along with Senior Editor Bill Apter. And our first question for Jake Roberts. You've appeared on television saying that you're the very best that the Legion of Doom has to offer, and we've noticed that the Road Warriors don't particularly like these comments. We'd like your reaction.
Well, the thing about being the very best is if you ever start in your own mind to say you're not the one, if you're not the very best in your own mind, then you're going to be a loser in the ring. There's nothing personal with the Road Warriors.
This doesn't mean that there's dissension within the Legion of Doom?
No, this is a business, man. I'm in here for money. Precious Paul takes care of all the little problems, and that's a small problem because the Road Warriors are the National Tag Team Champions, and I will be the world's TV champion again. You can count on that. Okay. So there's no conflict of interest.
All right.
Well, I think Bill has a question about that TV
No,
title.
I'm not stirring anything up. All right, it cost Ronnie Garvin $34,000 to get that match, okay?
Yeah.
Who got the money, you or Paul Ellering?
Well, we spread it around. We're fair about this. It was a situation where Paul had used his mind, and I used my body to get it.
Did Paul take a larger percentage?
That's none of your business, is it? I got my money, he got his. Everybody who's involved got theirs. The only person that didn't get their money was Ronnie Garvin.
Well, I think since this was on World Championship Wrestling on the Superstation, everyone out there really wants to know who got the big cut of it.
Well, why don't you ask Ronnie Garvin? He signed the check.
Fine. Great.
All right, our fan question this time comes from Chuck Mecke of St. Louis, Missouri. And Chuck points out that you've been consistently at the top of the most hated ratings in Pro Wrestling Illustrated magazine, and he wants to know how you feel about being one of the most hated wrestlers in the world.
Kind of makes me proud. You know, I don't care for the fans. Don't get me wrong, I won't go out there and chop them up or anything like that, but I don't have the time to spend shaking hands, signing autographs. I don't have the desire to do it. I used to do it a few years ago, but after a while, you just get so fed up with them, man. Let me go out and beat somebody up, do my job, collect my money, and let Paul get me out of the building. That's all I need to do.
All right, so you would say that you really don't care about the fans?
No, I don't.
All right.
You? Well, you do because they buy your little magazine, right?
I don't think we have to answer that.
We're interviewing you here.
We don't have to answer that.
Well, we don't have to answer anything either then. Just remember this, it's great to be great, and we're the greatest, and you're lucky we're even sitting here talking to you.
Craig, you want to wrap things up?
They ask.
All right, if you have a question that you would like one of your favorite wrestlers to answer on press conference, write it down and mail it to Pro Wrestling Illustrated Press Conference, Box 48, Rockville Center, New York 115.
When Jake the Snake spoke, you listened. He was articulate but menacing, soft-spoken but got his point across. Jake's promos had the ability to take you on a roller coaster ride of emotions, leaving the fans with feelings of joy, excitement, uncertainty, unpredictability, uneasiness, maybe even despair. True makings of both a vigilante hero and an arch villain. He was indeed a snake in every sense of the word, because just as a serpent does, he was sly, treacherous, and his whole aim was to exploit your trust, give you a false sense of security, then stab you in the heart when you least expected him to. And it all started with his words. That was Jake's mastery on the mic and in his promos. Now, while his on-screen persona that Jake portrayed may have been fictitious, there is indeed truth in fiction. Jake was constantly at war with his personal inner demons, and yet somehow was able to manifest his real-life woes into one of the greatest and most captivating on-screen characters of all time. The emotional pain in his life would eventually spiral out of control due to alcohol and substance abuse, coupled with living the rock star lifestyle throughout the 80s and 90s. Jake was his own worst enemy, and anytime you're dealing with addiction and you just so happen to hit rock bottom like Jake did, there's nowhere else to go but up. This is the redemption of Jake the Snake Roberts. So let's wrap. So what are some of your more memorable moments when you think of Jake the Snake? There's a lot of them, so I'll wait. Put it in the comments. By now you should have, so I'll go. You know, I got several. His snakes. He used to tote his snakes to the ring in the canvas bags, lugged over his shoulder with that menacing theme music playing. His opponent laid out at the end of the match, and if they didn't come to in enough time, Jake would unleash that huge boa constrictor named Damien. Remember The Omen, the 1976 movie about a young child who turns out to be the Antichrist? His name was Damien, and he was associated with evil. He was actually the son of the devil. That's what comes to my mind, at least, when I think of whom Jake may have named the snake after. As a matter of fact, he named another one of his snakes Lucifer. You know, Satan, the devil. He also had that D-Venom King Cobra. Remember that? The one used to bite Randy Savage's arm, had him entangled in the ropes. Hell, even before that, Jake, accompanied by The Undertaker, they terrorized him and soon-to-be wife Elizabeth after crashing their wedding reception, and the Cobra was hidden in one of the presents. Liz went to open it and was revealed to be Jake's pet snake. She was traumatized. Stuff of nightmares, truly. And who could forget about the 1996 King of the Ring pay-per-view, the famous promo that essentially launched Stone Cold Steve Austin into superstardom. Jake came back a born-again Christian. This time around, he had the Burmese python with him named Revelations. The gimmick itself, however, was behind the times, and Austin was on the rise. Jake was a stepping stone, and Austin went over Jake to become the King of the Ring that year. Talk about your Psalms, talk about John 3:16. Austin 3:16 says, "I just whipped your ass." Jake played a role in that. Jake was by far one of the most entrancing on-screen personas I've had the pleasure of watching growing up. Who knew what Jake was actually going through? The torment, the lifestyle, the drugs, the alcohol, the pain that never seemed to go away. Fast forward many years, we didn't think Jake was going to make it, if we're being honest. This fall from grace played out right before our very eyes. So how did all this come about? Who is the man behind the myth? Jake the Snake Roberts was born Rulian Smith Jr. on May 30th, 1955 in Gainesville, Texas. His childhood was tumultuous and grief-stricken, to say the very least. He was born as a result of Ray P.E., which had a profound effect on his life growing up. His father, Rulian Grizzly Smith, was also a professional wrestler who began his career in 1958, retired in the late 1970s, and competed most notably in promotions such as NWA, the WWF, or Worldwide Wrestling Federation, and the American Wrestling Association. Now, the 6'10", 350-pound Grizzly garnered success and racked up quite the accolades inside the square circle, but the man behind the wrestler was much more sinister in his own household, according to the accounts made by his children. Now, the way Jake tells it, his father, Grizzly, who was dating Jake's grandmother, had taken advantage of her daughter, all the while Jake's grandmother had dozed off in the next room over. Jake's biological mother, Paula Lorraine Smith, was only 12 years old when she was taken advantage of, and 13 when she became pregnant with Jake. 9 months later, Rulian Jr. was born. This and more accusations of abuse have been well documented in Beyond the Mat, and it was the subject matter in Season 3 of Dark Side of the Ring, In the Shadow of Grizzly Smith, in which Smith's children were interviewed. Do yourselves a favor and check that episode out if you haven't gotten around to it. Definitely worth the watch, but prepare yourselves ahead of time. I'm telling you now, it'll have you on an emotional roller coaster. His mother would birth 2 other children, and by the time she was 17 years of age, she was already divorced with 3 kids. Wow, man. Jake's half-sister, Rockin' Robin Smith, also accused her father Grizzly of repeated molestation around the age of only 6. Jake has several siblings. We touched on Rockin' Robin, his half-sister. Michael Smith, his half-brother, wrestled for the World Wrestling Federation between 87 and 91 at Sam Houston. Jake also had a half-sister he chose not to name, who unfortunately is no longer with us. Jake recounted that she was also a victim of her father Grizzly, having been impregnated 3 times before the age of 18. Her way out was to run away with a 55-year-old man with whom she birthed a child. However, this man's past relationship baggage would rear its ugly head, and tragedy would bestow itself upon Jake and his family. Allegedly, the man's ex-wife kidnapped Jake's sister and killed her. The woman received 10 years in prison for kidnapping because the body was never found. Therefore, she was never charged with her murder. What's even crazier is when she completed her sentence and she was released from prison, she and her ex-husband collected on the life insurance money of Jake's sister and ran off into the sunset. Now, if that wasn't enough, before Jake reached adulthood, his grandfather was a raging alcoholic, his grandmother passed away due to cancer, his stepfather, someone who he loved and respected, was electrocuted to death, and he was the victim of repeated sexual abuse by his stepmother. Jake made it through fire and brimstone, but not unscathed. The traumatic childhood led him down a sad existence of drugs and alcohol, debauchery, embarrassment, disappointment, seemingly no end in sight, which meant one of 2 things: death or prison. Or so we all feared would undoubtedly be the outcome. Jake debuted in 1974 and cut his teeth in Mid-South Wrestling, Mid-Atlantic Championship Wrestling, and Georgia Championship Wrestling. He traveled to Calgary, Alberta, Canada, and wrestled for Stu Hart's Stampede Wrestling in order to own his craft and develop his character. There he feuded with Sylvester Ritter, or better known by his ring name Junkyard Dog, which concluded in a ladder match, considered at the time to be revolutionary for the promotion and tape study material for hopeful prospects in Stampede Wrestling. Fun fact, early in his career, he was an original member of the Legion of Doom, which was actually a stable of heels at the time led by manager Paul Ellering, consisting the likes of the Road Warriors Hawk and Animal, the Enforcer AA Arn Anderson, King Kong Bundy, the Spoiler, Matt Bourne, and Roberts himself. He's feuded with the best of the best, from JYD to Rugged Ronnie Garvin, the Von Erichs, to Dirty Dick Slater. Not to mention the many of accolades and world championships he's won all over the globe. He attained the Stampede North American Heavyweight Championship during his stint with Stampede, a beautiful title, the Americas and Puerto Rico Heavyweight Championships while he was in AWF, the American Wrestling Federation, multiple championships in Mid-South, NWA, World Class, repeated entries on Pro Wrestling Illustrated's Top 500 to include PWI Illustrated Wrestler of the Year. We could be here all day naming Jake's accomplishments and his credentials in pro wrestling. The work he put in early on throughout the 70s through the mid-80s, fine-tuning his skills, crafting his promos, improving his in-ring psychology, and the unveiling of what Jake deemed an untrustworthy and snake-like character was a precursor for what was to come, and what truly lay in store for fans all over the world. Jake was a fan of Ken Stabler, who primarily played for the Oakland Raiders as a quarterback for 17 seasons. He scored a long touchdown run, winding the field while he was back in high school, and his coach aptly named him the Snake. The name stuck, and Jake was a fan of both him and his nickname. Thus, the in-ring name, Jake the Snake Roberts, was born. He fully embraced the Snake persona, from the menacing, thought-provoking promos to the large snakes he brought to the ring with him, which would psych his opponents out mentally before they would even lock up. Even how he entered the ring, he'd slide or slither under the bottom rope in and out of the ring like a snake that's about to strike. Enter the World Wrestling Federation in 1986. He made an immediate impact shortly after debuting when he defeated George Wells, former pro wrestler and Canadian Football League player. What made the night memorable? Following the match, Jake revealed Damien for the first time on WWE's grandest stage, WrestleMania 2, placed him on Wells and it coiled his body around him and tightened, which caused Wells to froth at the mouth, causing fans in attendance to gasp in awe at the sight of it. Between 86 and 92, Jake was involved in many memorable and noteworthy feuds during his stint with the WWF. His first major one began with Ricky the Dragon Steamboat after Jake had attacked him prior to their scheduled match on a televised episode of Saturday Night Main Event, which didn't take place after all due to the viciousness of the assault. During which Jake delivered an absolutely brutal looking DDT on the outside of the ring, which concussed him. Jake was reluctant at first, but Vince was adamant about the spot, and Steamboat convinced Jake that he'd be able to protect himself upon contact. Unfortunately, that didn't happen, and Steamboat was driven unforgivingly on the exposed floor, and his head hit smack dab on the concrete. I watched the spot as a kid, and little did I know the reality of the situation until adulthood. His wife Bonnie was actually in attendance and witnessed the whole thing. Jake later recounted the incident and described the sound of Steamboat's head hitting the floor as a watermelon bursting. It was that loud. Crazy. Due to his promo skills, he was afforded additional TV time and gifted with his own talk/interview segment called The Snake Pit, used as the driving force to get talent over in advanced feuds. As the aura of Jake the Snake increased, so did his popularity with the fans. The intent was to set Jake up as a dastardly heel to Hulk Hogan's good guy persona, who at the time was undoubtedly a pop culture icon and WWF's biggest draw during the time. However, the fans rejoiced and actually cheered Jake when he nailed the Immortal One with a DDT during an episode of The Snake Pit. Fans actually began chanting DDT, which reportedly caused Vince to pull back on the intended rivalry between the two. Later on, Jake would jokingly and sarcastically thank the fans for derailing what would potentially have been the biggest payday and run of his career. His surge in popularity resulted in an official face turn in which he feuded with the Honky Tonk Man. Honky Tonk actually did some damage to Jake's neck when he blasted him with a hard guitar shot, which wasn't gimmicked to break easily at the time. Once he recovered, he challenged Honky Tonk to a match at WrestleMania 3. Now, while Honky Tonk resembled a famous musician, Roberts brought a real musician into the fold. He had Detroit legend and legendary songwriter Alice Cooper, who, by the way, absolutely loves snakes, accompany him to the match, and he was in Jake's corner. Cooper proceeded to lend an assist to Jake during the match, which still ended in a losing effort from Jake on this night. He feuded with the late great Rick Rude due to Rude's gimmick of pointing out a female in the crowd, and the lucky lady would get a kiss from the Ravishing One after each match. You can see where this is going. Rude chose Jake's actual wife Cheryl, who refused to kiss him, which prompted Rude to further insult Cheryl once she revealed that Jake was her man. Jake seethingly came out for the save, fending off Rude. The feud became even more heated when Rude removed his robe and revealed Jake's wife graffitied on his tights. He even feuded with the likes of Earthquake, who killed off Damien with a series of earthquake splashes, which turns out was actually a canvas bag containing hamburger meat and a small mechanical device to simulate movement in the bag, because wrestling. Earthquake went on to add further insult to injury when he supposedly served out Quake burgers, supposedly ground from the carcass of Damien, to the announce team. This prompted Jake to come back and bring another friend in the form of Damien's bigger brother, Lucifer. He went on to feud with the Ultimate Warrior, who sought out Jake for help in his feud with The Undertaker. Little did Warrior know that the seeds were being planted for Jake's eventual heel turn. He took Warrior through a series of tests in which Jake locked Warrior in a coffin on an episode of The Funeral Parlor, buried him alive before abandoning him, and still convincing Warrior to walk through a pit of snakes, which ended when a prop cobra bit Warrior, causing the all-powerful and leader of the Warrior Nation to fall before Jake in a weakened state. Jake would then be joined by both The Undertaker and Paul Bearer, and with words that pierced like a javelin proclaimed, "Never trust a snake," completing the heel transition. His most prolific feud was with Macho Man Randy Savage, in which Jake goaded Savage out of retirement when he continually insulted Savage, prompting him to leave the announce booth and go after Jake, which turned out very bad for Savage.
Jake the Snake Roberts enticing Randy Savage. What's this? What's he doing? Get out of there, Macho! Oh no! Jake the Snake Roberts. Look at that! Look at that! Roberts with the King Cobra. Macho! Jeez! That's the creepiest looking snake I've ever seen in my life. He's got it too close to him. Keep it away from it. That snake is trying. Wait a minute, the snake is ready. Oh, the snake is fighting it. The Snake is biting him. I'm out of here.
He even slapped Elizabeth after he brutalized Savage post-match following a losing effort on Jake's behalf. Once Jake was released from his contract in '92, he wrestled for various promotions such as WCW, in which he worked for a short stint, Total Nonstop Action, the world-famous Mexican promotion AAA, in which he feuded with Conan and wrestled him in a hair versus hair match. Smoky Mountain, he returned to WWF, an actual born-again Christian and preacher with Bible and albino Burmese python revelations in hand, and was to be pushed as a Cinderella story, but nagging injuries caused plans to change course. In the summer of '97, he appeared in Extreme Championship Wrestling in a surprising nostalgic appearance, and he even relocated to the UK and wrestled for Ricky Knight's promotion, World Association of Wrestling. He started his own promotion there called Real Stars of Wrestling, or RSOW, and ran 3 events, each headlined by both Jake Roberts and the Honky Tonk Man. Jake felt slighted when he was informed that the WWF wanted Jake to wind down his in-ring career and transition to a backstage role. This really didn't suit well, which resulted in his eventual relapse. His addiction and constant struggles with alcohol and drugs is no secret to fans, as documented throughout the course of his career, and evidently played out in front of fans, up-and-coming wrestlers who absolutely looked up to Jake, his peers, and those closest to him. He started drinking around the age of 11 years old and only got into sports entertainment to begin with as a result of the repeated abuse and cruelties he experienced growing up. For instance, Grizzly Smith, Jake's dad, was always on the road, of course, the life of a pro wrestler, especially back then. Thing is, Grizzly never explained to his children that wrestling was predetermined or daddy's gonna be alright. Jake went on believing his dad was in there seriously getting hurt and continued to sell his injuries in front of his family. He maintained this secrecy and honored kayfabe even at home. Get this, Jake attended one of his dad's matches in a drunken stupor and challenged one of the other wrestlers. Not having any sort of training or pro wrestling background at the time, I believe this was following his graduation from high school, but in any case, Jake got stretched and embarrassed. But his dad, in his ever so supportive ways, expressed to Jake that he was embarrassed beyond belief and ashamed. From that moment, Jake set out to not only prove his father wrong, but show that he could too succeed at this sport, which he did. All Jake really wanted, though, was for his dad to say, "Hey son, I'm proud of you." That day never came. The drinking escalated once Jake began wrestling. He was on the road full time and added hard drugs to his repertoire as a coping mechanism to deal with the stressors of being away for long periods at a time, as well as the unresolved traumatic experiences while growing up. He'd smoke pot on a regular basis before graduating to the hard stuff like speed, which is like a mood-altering methamphetamine, a very addictive substance. His drug of choice, though, was cocaine. With all these vices, his life was bound to spiral out of control, and it's only so long a person battling addiction can keep up appearances for the camera and bright lights. Alcohol was by far the biggest obstacle in his life, and he's gone on record to say, quote, "It no longer became a choice to drink, it was a necessity," end quote. He wrestled with his addiction day in and night out, which caused a rift between him and his 8 children. Most notably his daughter Brandy, who did the very best she could to shield her brothers from seeing their dad in that light. Jake's attempt to rekindle their relationship was documented in Beyond the Mat as well. Hard booze, beer, drugs, the cravings that go along with that, the lifestyle, depression, a broken family, a broken man. I think it's well documented that one low point was the infamous Heroes of Wrestling pay-per-view. Heroes of Wrestling was supposed to be a series which featured our heroes, the ones we idolized growing up. That idea was scrapped due to the low buy rate and the controversial incident involving a highly intoxicated Jake Roberts in the main event. Jake relapsed by consuming a significant amount of alcohol prior to the event. His opponent on this night was supposed to be Jim the Anvil Neidhart. He was supposed to cut a promo on Neidhart, but what ended up happening was Jake cut an incoherent, slurred speech, which ended up being filmed and posted on WrestleCrap.com. You don't want to play cards with me because I'll cheat, okay?
I cheat. You want to play 21? I got 22. You want to play blackjack? I got 2 of those too. You want to play ace and an ace? Maybe I got too many of those too. Would you not gamble with me?
I think the final straw came, and what some may call the point of rock bottom was a weekend appearance for Firestorm Pro Wrestling. Goes without saying, Jake was in an inebriated state and cut another of those promos. He wrestled JT Lightning that night. Match was poor. He let down a lot of people that night. 700 were in attendance that night, and Lightning cut a scathing promo on Jake following the match. Jake needed help. He needed all the help he could muster. He needed a outpouring support from his family and someone to reach a hand out, and that person was DDP, Diamond Dallas Page. He became a certified fitness instructor and developed a program which featured a series of power yoga workout videos called YRG, Yoga for Regular Guys, later renamed DDP Yoga. DDPYoga.com cites, DDP Yoga is a revolutionary approach to fitness that combines the best of yoga positions, sports rehab therapy, old school calisthenics, and dynamic resistance to give you a complete workout that requires no running, no jumping, and no lifting. Perfect for persons rehabbing from injury or morbidly obese, wanting to get back into shape using movements of low impact but challenging at the same time. The successes of DDP Yoga have been revolutionary, the most notably being Arthur Boorman, who used straps to hold himself up. He lost 140 pounds in 10 months and credits that to DDP Yoga. DDP has gone on record to express his two mentors were the American Dream Dusty Rhodes and Jake the Snake Roberts. DDP started late in the business by the age of 35, and Jake helped DDP early in his career. You stick your neck out for DDP, he pays it forward. DDP, like the rest of fans all over the world, witnessed Jake's fall from superstar. He always wanted to help Jake. So after determining that Jake was ready to accept help, Page was all in. So he brought Jake to the recovery crib. The way ahead was not an easy one, and recovery was a long road ahead, but Jake was determined to succeed. No road to recovery is without his roadblocks and failures, but Jake got back up. His trials, efforts, and his failures were all showcased in a documentary called The Resurrection of Jake the Snake Roberts. Highly recommend anyone who may be suffering with vices and addictions, no matter what they may be. Check this out if you're in need of some inspiration. It's very real. Jake started at 300 pounds with nagging injuries when he was active from his pro wrestling days, and through hard work, perseverance, and outpouring support from fans who raised money in excess of $7,000 through crowdfunding so Jake could pay for his shoulder surgery, not to mention family by his side and the one dear friend who cared enough to lend a helping hand, wanting nothing in return but for Jake's recovery. He lost upwards of 65 pounds and by the grace of God was able to get in ring shape, which meant Jake could officially retire from the ring his way on his terms. He even returned to WWE in 2014 for Old School Raw, looking healthier than he has in what seemed like many moves to fans and fellow performers alike. That old too familiar music played over the sound system, and Jake made his way to the ring. CM Punk and the rest of the performers gave the ring to Jake as he laid his python on Dean Ambrose's body. Ambrose was supposed to be knocked out, but visibly smiled. Roberts was a fan of Ambrose's as he was growing up. Jake attained many more accolades, and by far the most impactful, his unanimous 2013 induction into the Cauliflower Alley Club, which is an organization that's been around for over 50 years, comprised of both active and retired professional wrestlers, boxers, and actors. Due to his contributions in pro wrestling, WWE Class of 2014 Hall of Fame, and just this past year was inducted into the Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame and Museum Class of 2020. He embarked on a series of spoken word tours in 2018 dubbed the Dirty Details Tour, Tales from the Pit. It was to feature, quote, an uncensored night of comedy, stories from the road, Q&A, and more, end quote. He owned his acting chops and made guest appearances in television sitcoms and movies such as Boy Meets World, and most recently, the sleeper hit Peanut Butter Falcon in 2019, a modern retelling of Huckleberry Finn, which won the South by Southwest Movie Festival and went on to gross over a whopping $23 million, which made it the highest grossing independent film that year. He plays Sam, a sort of antagonist who abuses a mentally challenged kid who wants to be a wrestler. He appears alongside Mick Foley in the movie. But Jake had one more trick up his sleeve.
This feels like a good one. Trust me.
He made this appearance in 2019 for that vignette, hyping the Women's Casino Battle Royale participants, and returned on the March 4th, 2020 episode of AEW Dynamite to confront Cody in a scathing promo, promising to introduce his client, whom we now know to be Lance Archer. Roberts is presently a manager and valet in All Elite Wrestling. Jake the Snake Roberts emerged from the dirt determined not to allow his history to become his destiny. That's going to do it for this episode. I appreciate y'all for the support. Feel free to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button if you enjoyed the content. Hit me in the comments. Until the next one, this is JTR Raps, signing off.